Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a Sustainable webinar. My name is Aurora Belfrage, and I have the honor of moderating today's conversation about North America's energy future and what does that mean for Europe. The backdrop is well known. We've signed the Paris Agreement. We're transitioning into a fossil-free economy. There are no silver bullets, and energy is obviously an important piece of the puzzle, as well as geopolitics, political realities, regulation, voters' understanding and appetite of change are key pillars. As a European investor myself, I see firsthand the challenges of energy innovation as we grow in scale to North America. Sustainable is dedicated to catalyzing the green transition, especially where tech meets sustainability. And therefore, we're excited to host these talks and give you guys an insightful hour into the ins and outs of the North American policy, stuff that you will need to deal with at some point. We've invited friends with decades of experience from the other side of the pond. Let me introduce Charles Girard, an international energy advisor, currently advising the World Bank and clean tech companies around the world. And he was previously the lead US Clean Tech Trade Commissioner in Washington, D.C. Bud Locklear, 30 years of public policy international relations experience in the US and Canada. His professional expertise include climate, energy, environment, trade, defense, as well as space and innovation policy. And prior to joining Earnscliffe, Bud served as special advisor for energy and environment to the US Embassy in Ottawa. Pablo, diplomat and environmental engineer who is focused on climate and environmental issues and water, particularly in Latin America, has served in 22 years in 6 countries, as well as Texas at the private sector. And Sustainable's own energy and climate and resource advisor, Miriam, who has 2 decades of services in Jerusalem, Baghdad, Washington, with energy security, sustainability and resources high on her agenda. So let's kick off today. Miriam, you are the reason that we're here today and that we've collected this panel to discuss today's topics. Could you give us the backdrop? Why are we here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Aurora. So I think this kicked off with a heated debate that we were having about what it's going to take for the energy transition to take root. And I think some of the challenges that we face in the US are very different than what we're seeing in Europe. I moved with my family to Stockholm last summer. And just on a very granular level, it's been incredible to see the attention and the focus on the environment. And that ranges from, being given compost bags within your apartment building, watching the biodiesel buses fly by, watching going to the fairly spectacular recycling boxes that stretch down the block that are in very organized fashion.
Miriam, are you being ironic or are you genuinely impressed?
I am genuinely impressed, and more so with the OVC, where we have made several pilgrimages to the larger recycling facilities. And I think, even my kids, they get a sense of how the foods that they eat in the cafeteria, what kind of emissions those have, whether that's meat or fish or whatnot. And so, I think there's such a big difference between where countries are in Europe, especially like Sweden, that have this consciousness, that have this understanding about what's needed and where we need to go. And I think looking across at the US, we have a very different system, very different wiring. I think some of the biggest issues we face are really just the bread and butter issues. Jobs, top of the list, how Americans are recovering from COVID, childcare, healthcare, paying for just putting a living wage on the table. And so I think, understanding that is where the US is such a big part of being able to make that green transition work and being able to bring that innovation from Sweden to the US. And this is where I'd like to get a little preachy, and I'd like to just make the pitch to really not just look at the states where things are so easy and to invest, and you're aligned with the states on different values, on your values. I would really encourage those of you in the Swedish audience that are really looking at the US to be bold. Look at those states that are traditionally have hard to abate industries like coal, steel, oil. Those are the places where you can have such a tremendous impact, especially if you believe in the change that's needed and the change to sort of accelerate that energy transition. That is where the magic is going to happen. It's not going to happen in the States where everybody thinks like you or agrees on the different steps. While I think that's important, I think it's so critical to look at those other states and to really widen the map and to look beyond the politics. I know that right now, it's hard not to be consumed by a political life in Washington, which is why I needed to step away. But it's so important to look beyond the politics and really try to focus on those areas and those states that need jobs, that need investments, that could benefit from all the talent and innovation here in Sweden.
So Miriam, just let me read between the lines here, because I daily get a big dollop of your cynicism when it comes to what the US landscape looks like.
And that's tempered.
And I know we're all, you guys should be grateful for the tempered version of this. But to understand you correctly, there's an opportunity for Nordic innovation and for Europe to contribute to the green transition. And US is obviously a key part in that, but there are some crucial bottlenecks, and I think that's what this hour is about. Like identifying where the political landscape or polarization or the lobby situation might create unnecessarily roadblocks. Is that it's a positive negative message here?
Yeah, and I think it's complicated. I think the U.S. is not a monolith. But I think at the root of what the average American faces, it's really looking at gas and fuel prices, worrying about inflation, worrying about things that are so seminal, and really in the short term, that's what they're focused on. And I think President Biden's very clear agenda on infrastructure and green transition is wonderful, and I think that's what we should all be working towards. But there are other steps that I think are in hard to abate industries that meet the need of the average American on the ground, and I think that that's the reality.
Let's move to our panelists that are still on the other side of the pond and haven't given up on them yet.
I haven't given up.
Sure. But if we start with you, could you give us a helicopter view, on what you're doing, but also your take on where the North American situation in terms of the energy transition is right now?
Thank you, Aurora. Yes. First off, for your audience, Canada is its economy, its ecosystem, its policies are inextricably intertwined with those of the United States. So when the United States, which is 10 times the size of Canada economically, infinitely greater in terms of geopolitical oomph, when the United States makes choices on climate policy, for example, it hits Canada directly. So when you have misalignment of the U.S. administration and Canadian administration, as we had during the Trump administration in Washington and the Trudeau administration here in Ottawa, it was very difficult policy-wise to try to get Canada get where it wanted to go. So that's one of the first things to point out. What I've been doing is, I think with the Biden administration in Washington and the Trudeau administration completely aligned on the goals and objectives climate-wise, it's really a question now of the mechanisms being used and who's slightly ahead of the other country and how that affects industry, how that affects the innovation economy, the investments the government makes, and the required investments that the private sector needs to make to actually bring this to fruition. So I think one of the challenges here in North America is you still have policy differences between the two federal governments, Canada and the United States. I won't speak to Mexico, maybe Pablo will. But you also have big differences, as Miriam noted, in the subnational governments. Provinces have very different ideas. They have relationships with U.S. states. Those states themselves have differing approaches. It's a very complex landscape, but it's a landscape full of promise in terms of great opportunities for investment, great opportunities for innovation, and lots of opportunity for carbon emissions abatement. Thanks.
If we unpack that complexity, because it doesn't benefit anyone just to hide behind it's complicated, I I'm seeing one is the political reality and the need to prioritize different types of challenges, where climate is one and biodiversity is another, as well as labor markets and COVID, etc. And the other might be, and I'm asking you, Bud, if I understood you correctly, is there also a bit of competition going between the countries? Like, who's the first, being on the forefront? Is that like a positive driver?
Absolutely. Canada very much wants to be seen, I think, in the same light as the Nordic countries, as a real established mover and shaker on climate. The United States has taken a very aggressive stance in terms of their target for GHG emissions reductions by 2030. There's a big difference, too, in just the amount of money that can be deployed in terms of that competition. There's a rhetorical competition that's occurring, but there is a dollar competition. And the United States, through President Biden's infrastructure bill, deployed approximately $1 trillion worth of money for a variety of things, but much of it directed at a transition economy, right? Whether it's social spending or whether it's spending for innovation. Canada's doing the same thing, a whole array of spending programs. Some of them are directly related to innovation, others are directly related to a just transition. And so I think it's important for someone who's looking at coming and establishing a business presence here in North America. You know, they'll want to think about what exactly is it. Are they looking for an opportunity to establish innovation, R&D? There's fantastic opportunities, of course, in both countries. Or are they looking to bring an established technology and deploy that in one of these jurisdictions? Canada, United States, one state versus another province. Those are all important questions.
And let's park a few of those things, because I want to do more deep dives into looking at what does the infrastructure investment look like and what does that mean. But also, I would like us by the end of this hour to been a bit specific about what type of grants and opportunities, like who are you going to call when you enter the North America coast.